Consider this. In 1850, Britain's industrial heart beat for the entire planet, producing more than half the world's iron, coal, and textiles. It was their railways that stitched continents together, their fleets that ruled the oceans, and their factories that were the engine of global industry. The supremacy of British engineering was so absolute that other nations could only purchase their machinery and hire their engineers, and mimic British methods in a desperate bid to compete. Yet by 1950, a chilling silence had fallen. Britain could no longer produce steel at a viable cost. Its legendary textile mills were shuttered. Its great shipyards lay dormant. The very factories that had sustained millions stood as hollow monuments to a bygone era. And Britain, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, was reduced to importing manufactured goods from Germany, America, and Japan. A single century. That is all it took to fall from producing half the world's goods to depending on its former pupils. The workshop of the world had become a hollowed-out post-industrial state, propped up by finance and services. And make no mistake, they never recovered. Not in 75 years. This is the immutable law. Once industrial capacity is lost, it is lost forever. And right now, in this year of 2025, the United States is tracing the exact same catastrophic timeline. We are merely 170 years behind them, walking the same grim path. The symptoms are identical. Factory closures, hemorrhaging market share, and importing from nations we once towered over. We are now in stage 4 of the 5-stage terminal decline that obliterated Britain's industrial base forever. But this was not an isolated tragedy. In 1950, Detroit stood as the wealthiest city in America, the undisputed automotive capital of the planet. By 2013, it was a bankrupt shell. Before we dissect the pattern of this decay, you must grasp what manufacturing truly represents to national power. This is not an abstract economic debate. In the cold calculus of reality, manufacturing transcends the simple act of making things. It is the bedrock of technological capability. It is the guarantor of supply chain resilience. It is the foundation of national security. It is the source of the middle-class jobs that sustain families and bind communities together. When a nation builds, it employs engineers who innovate. It forges a workforce with irreplaceable skills. It cultivates supply chains that spawn entire ecosystems of dependent industries. An automobile plant is not a monolith. It doesn't merely employ assembly line workers. It sustains steel suppliers, component manufacturers, and expert tool makers. It fuels logistics networks and employs legions of engineers and designers. A single factory job supports 5 additional jobs within the community. When manufacturing flourishes, the middle class thrives. Because these are well-paying jobs, they do not demand a college degree, they do not require crippling debt. Skills are learned on the job, and a respectable wage is earned. With that wage, you buy a home, you raise a family, you accumulate wealth. This was the American dream, forged in the fires of industry. But when manufacturing dies, that dream perishes with it. The jobs vanish, the skills atrophy, the supply chains migrate overseas, and they do not return. Because once that core manufacturing capability is gone, once the factory gates are locked for the last time, the skilled workers retire, and that institutional knowledge evaporates. Rebuilding takes decades, if it is possible at all. And the historical record is unambiguous. Every single time a nation surrenders its industrial base, it never truly recovers. It becomes a dependent state, reliant on other nations for its goods, for its technology, and ultimately for its very security. Manufacturing is synonymous with power. To lose it is to commit a form of national suicide. Let us now analyze how this has happened 3 times before, and why it is happening again. Our analysis begins with Britain, the complete cautionary tale of how the workshop of the world devolved into an industrial graveyard. In the year 1850, Britain's position as the undisputed workshop of the world was absolute. The Industrial Revolution had ignited there in the 1760s, and by 1850, its dominance over global manufacturing was total. The metrics are staggering. It produced over 50% of the world's iron, more than 50% of its coal, and over 40% of all manufactured goods on the planet. British textiles were the fabric of global commerce. British steel formed the skeleton of railways spanning continents. British vessels were the lifeblood of international trade. Their factories were without question the most advanced on Earth. This represents stage 1. Absolute manufacturing dominance, an unassailable technological lead, and unparalleled production capacity. Britain held every conceivable advantage. They were the architects of the steam engine, the power loom, the Bessemer steel process, the railways, the telegraph. All were British innovations. They possessed vast deposits of coal and iron ore and commanded access to global markets through their sprawling empire. They had immense capital for investment. Critically, they had the skilled workforce that possessed the intrinsic knowledge of how to build. Britain's dominance was so profound, they championed free trade, a logical position, as no other nation could possibly compete. Why erect tariffs when you were untouchable? But such supremacy is always fleeting, because success inevitably breeds imitators. This marks the arrival of stage 2. Competitors emerge. They copy the incumbent's technology, and then they begin to improve upon it. In the mid-1800s, the industrial engines of Germany and the United States began to stir. They dissected British methods, acquired British machinery, and co-opted British engineers, only to relentlessly improve upon everything. Germany's heavy investment in technical education was the first ominous sign. They engineered an educational system that produced a workforce far superior to Britain's antiquated apprenticeship model. Industrial titans like Krupp and Siemens unleashed a wave of innovation in steel and electrical engineering. By 1900, the balance had tipped. Germany's steel production eclipsed Britain's, as another threat gathered across the Atlantic. Britain's inherent weaknesses were becoming fatal. A crippling lack of vast resources, no significant oil reserves, and a constrained domestic market, while American titans like Carnegie and Rockefeller erected industrial empires on the foundation of superior technology. By the turn of the century, the United States was outproducing both Britain and Germany combined in steel. The analysis confirms this as stage 3, the irreversible decline of market share. The competitive pressure intensifies to an unbearable degree. Today, Britain is a nation of imports, fundamentally incapable of producing its own steel at a competitive price. Its last coal mines fall silent as it imports manufactured goods from China, Germany, and across Asia. The lesson from Britain's collapse is a brutal one. Once manufacturing dominance is lost, it is never regained. Technology marches relentlessly forward. Competitors inevitably surpass you. The distinction of being first becomes meaningless when others execute better and cheaper. But Britain, one could argue, was a sprawling old empire. Perhaps a single, hyper-focused industrial city could resist this decay. Detroit would prove that theory devastatingly wrong. Our analysis now shifts to 1950, Detroit, Michigan, the Motor City. In 1950, Detroit stood as the wealthiest city per capita in America, the undisputed global epicenter of the automotive industry. Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. The Big Three, all headquartered there, directly employed a staggering 250,000 workers, with hundreds of thousands more tethered to their fate in supporting industries. Part suppliers, tool and die makers, steel plants, rubber factories, the entire automotive supply chain was fused to the city's very existence. This is stage 1. Manufacturing dominance, built on the fatal flaw of single industry specialization. If you lived in Detroit, your life was tied to the auto industry, and for a time, the compensation was extraordinary. UAW union jobs commanded wages equivalent to $25 to $30 per hour in today's currency, fortified by benefits, health insurance, pensions, and the illusion of job security. A high school graduate could walk into a factory, purchase a home, support a family, and expect a comfortable retirement. This was the American dream made manifest. A precarious pinnacle, Detroit's population swelled to 1.8 million in 1950, with the highest per capita income in the nation. A new highway system was forged, suburbs sprawled, and downtown pulsed with theaters and department stores and restaurants. The city was a monument to its own success, but this dominance bred a fatal complacency. We now enter stage 2, the emergence of competitors who would improve upon the model. In the 1960s and 70s, Japanese automakers began to infiltrate the U.S. market. Toyota, Honda, Nissan. Initially, they were dismissed as small, cheap novelties, low-quality cars. But this assessment was dangerously flawed. The Japanese were improving at an alarming rate, systematically deconstructing American manufacturing to re-engineer it for superiority, inventing lean manufacturing and just-in-time inventory. They embraced the philosophy of Kaizen, continuous improvement, and the results were undeniable. They were building objectively superior automobiles that were more reliable, more fuel efficient, and cheaper to maintain. When the 1973 oil crisis hit, spiking gas prices, the American muscle car became an overnight liability. The market demanded fuel efficiency, and Japanese cars were positioned to deliver. The Big Three, however, remained trapped in their old paradigm, churning out large, inefficient, unreliable vehicles, operating under the fatal assumption of consumer loyalty. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Stage 3. The precipitous decline of market share, triggering the first wave of offshoring. By the 1980s, Japanese automakers had seized 30% of the U.S. market. The Big Three were hemorrhaging. Their response was not innovation, but a desperate retreat to cost-cutting. They began shuttering factories in Detroit, chasing cheaper labor in Tennessee and Mexico. Anywhere wages were lower? The data is stark. Detroit's auto employment plummeted from 250,000 in 1950 to just 100,000 by 1990. The decline was relentless. This signals stage 4, the acceleration of factory closures and the vanishing of jobs. The 2000s were catastrophic for Detroit. The 2008 financial crisis delivered a near-fatal blow to GM and Chrysler, forcing both into bankruptcy, requiring a government bailout to avoid liquidation. But the Detroit factories never reopened. Ford survived without a bailout, but it too continued to close its Detroit plants. This pattern of decay extends beyond one city. We must now examine the American Rust Belt. The period of analysis is 1970 to 2020. The Rust Belt, the industrial heartland of America. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin. In the 1970s, this region was the forge, producing the steel, machinery, and goods that built a nation. Pittsburgh was the undisputed steel capital. Cleveland was a nexus of steel and machinery. Youngstown was steel. Gary, Indiana was steel. Akron was rubber. Buffalo was manufacturing. This was stage 1. A seemingly unshakable dominance in manufacturing, spanning countless industries. Consider the year 1970. The United States forged a staggering 20% of the world's steel. U.S. Steel, a titan of industry, commanded a workforce of 300,000. Bethlehem Steel, another giant, employed 165,000 souls. The names echo through history. Republic Steel, LTV Steel, and dozens more. An entire ecosystem of millions, their livelihoods tied to the mills and the industries that fed them. These were not just jobs, they were careers. Union-backed careers. The compensation? The equivalent of $30, even $40 an hour in today's currency. Comprehensive benefits, secure pensions. The social contract was simple. Graduate high school, secure a position at the mill, and after 30 years, a full pension awaited. Entire towns owed their existence to these industrial hearts. Youngstown, Ohio, a city of 170,000 in 1970, was a monument to steel. But on the horizon, a shadow was growing. The rest of the world was learning and catching up. This brings us to stage 2, the emergence of competitors armed with superior technology. Throughout the 1970s, nations like Germany, Japan, and South Korea were not just rebuilding, they were building smarter, with the latest advancements in steel production. They deployed electric arc furnaces and continuous casting, methods far more efficient than America's aging blast furnaces. Compounding this technological leap was a brutal economic reality. Their labor costs were a fraction of America's. An American steelworker commanded $25 an hour. Their Korean counterpart, a mere $3. The arithmetic was as simple as it was devastating. By 1980, the verdict was in. American steel could no longer compete. It became economically indefensible to produce steel domestically when importing it was cheaper. And how did American steel corporations respond? Not with modernization, but with lobbying for tariffs in a desperate race to cut costs. And so began stage 3, the inexorable decline of market share, the beginning of the great offshoring. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the closures began, a slow, creeping death. First, the least efficient plants fell. Then, the old integrated mills followed. Corporate casualties mounted. U.S. Steel was forced to slash its workforce from a formidable 300,000 down to a mere 50,000. Bethlehem Steel declared bankruptcy in 2001. LTV Steel collapsed a year earlier, in 2000. Republic Steel vanished. Entire corporations wiped from existence. And the contagion was not limited to steel. A systemic collapse was underway across the Rust Belt as the textile industry hemorrhaged to China. Electronics manufacturing fled to Asia, machinery to Mexico. The North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 was not the cause, but a powerful accelerant. It created a clear incentive. Relocate factories to Mexico. Pay workers $2 an hour instead of $25. Then, import the finished goods back, completely tariff-free. Thousands of factories made the exodus. This ushered in stage 4, a rapid acceleration of factory closures. The jobs didn't just leave, they vanished. The decade of the 2000s delivered the final decisive blow. China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 triggered an explosion in its manufacturing capacity. By 2010, a chilling statistic emerged. China was producing more steel than the rest of the world combined. Their factories produced everything: textiles, electronics, heavy machinery, tools, furniture. They did it all at a price point that American factories simply could not, under any circumstances, match. The Rust Belt was now hemorrhaging jobs. The national data paints a grim picture. Manufacturing employment plummeted from 19 million in 1980 to just 11 million by 2010. 8 million livelihoods erased. Crucially, these were not replaced with jobs of equivalent value. A factory worker earning $60,000 a year suddenly found themselves in the retail sector, earning $25,000, if they were fortunate. The inevitable outcome? Entire towns began to die. Youngstown's population collapsed from 170,000 to 60,000, its mills either demolished or left to rust. Gary, Indiana saw its numbers fall from 175,000 to 69,000. Entire city blocks were simply abandoned. Consider Flint, Michigan, where the auto industry's collapse cut the population by 50%. Akron, its rubber industry extinct. Buffalo, its manufacturing base erased. These once proud cities became grim symbols of industrial death, plagued by high unemployment, deep-seated poverty, and spiraling drug epidemics. The opioid crisis ravaged the Rust Belt with particular fury, a predictable outcome for a population stripped of hope and employment. With no future in sight, they turned to chemical oblivion. The very factories that once employed thousands devolved into skeletal ruins or were demolished entirely, leaving behind only vacant, poisoned land. The lesson of the Rust Belt is a chilling one. When a manufacturing base is removed, it takes the entire community down with it. And the critical point is this: those jobs never return. We have 3 case studies: Britain, Detroit, and the Rust Belt itself. All of them followed the same predictable 5-stage pattern of decline. The most alarming realization? The entire United States is now tracing those same steps. We must break down this pattern, for it repeats with terrifying precision. Stage 1. A period of absolute manufacturing dominance built on a technological lead. Britain in 1850, Detroit in 1950, the American Rust Belt in 1970, and America as a whole, from 1950 through 1970. In every instance, they were the undisputed best, the most efficient, the most advanced, the most productive. And it was this very success that bred a fatal complacency. Stage 2. Competitors emerge. They copy the existing technology and they improve upon it. Germany and America replicated Britain's success. Japan replicated Detroit's. China replicated the Rust Belt's. The pattern is always the same. The competitor studies the leader, isolates what works, enhances it, and combines it with the crushing advantage of lower labor costs. And every time, the leader dismisses the threat. They can't match our quality, they say. They will never catch up. A catastrophic miscalculation, repeated every single time. This leads to stage 3, the decline of market share and the beginning of offshoring. Britain began losing its share to Germany and America by 1900. Detroit ceded its market share to Japan by 1980. The Rust Belt lost its dominance to China by the year 2000. And in each case, the response was identical: a failure to innovate. Instead, they cut costs. Instead of investing in the future, they moved production to cheaper locations. This strategy does not halt the decline. It accelerates it, leading directly to stage 4, the rapid acceleration of factory closures. The pattern is undeniable. Jobs simply vanish. We saw it in Britain during the 1930s and 1950s. We witnessed it in Detroit through the 2000s and across the Rust Belt from 2000 to 2020. The cold reality is this: when the factories shutter, they never reopen. The displaced workers never find equivalent employment. The communities built around them inevitably collapse. And now, this historical plague is upon America. Since the year 2000, this nation has hemorrhaged 5 million manufacturing jobs. The skeletal remains of closed factories now litter the landscape. Our trade deficit has swelled to an unsustainable $800 billion in imports over exports. This is the precipice of stage 5, complete and utter deindustrialization, a state of total economic dependency. Britain succumbed to this fate by 1950, becoming a nation reliant on others for nearly everything. Detroit crossed this threshold by 2013. The city's automotive heart ripped out and gone forever. The Rust Belt followed, reaching this terminal point by 2020. Its steel is now forged in China. Its goods are manufactured across Asia. And for the United States, the alarming truth is we are entering stage 5 at this very moment. Let's analyze America's current position with cold, hard data. We are precariously balanced in stage 4, on the verge of tipping into stage 5. Manufacturing's contribution to our GDP has plummeted from a robust 28% in 1950 to a meager 11% today. The industrial workforce has been decimated, falling from 19 million in 1980 to just 13 million today. This occurred while our population nearly doubled, a stark indicator that we have lost the fundamental capability to manufacture at scale. Our ability to produce our own pharmaceuticals is a dangerous illusion. A sobering 80% of the core components in American medicine originate in China or India, a critical dependency that became an acute crisis during COVID. We are incapable of producing basic masks, ventilators, or personal protective equipment. We were forced to rely on imports from China. This dependency extends to our electronics. While iPhones may be designed in California, every single component is forged in Asia. The necessary supply chains and skilled labor to produce them here simply no longer exist. The crisis deepens with our steel industry. We now import more than we are capable of making. The disparity is staggering. China produces 1 billion tons of steel annually, while the US manages a mere 80 million. We are utterly dependent. This extends to shipbuilding, where China constructs 40% of the world's vessels, and America, less than 1%. Our own naval power is critically reliant on foreign shipyards. Worse, we are incapable of fabricating advanced semiconductors. Taiwan produces 90% of the world's most advanced chips. The geopolitical calculus is terrifying. If China seizes Taiwan, our access to the microprocessors that power our entire modern world is severed. Cars, weapon systems, computers, everything goes dark. We have systematically hollowed out our manufacturing core, and rebuilding it would demand decades and trillions of dollars. And that assumes such a recovery is even possible, because the institutional knowledge has vanished. The generation of workers who understood how to operate these factories has either retired or passed away. The intricate supply chains have been rerouted to Asia. The essential machinery has been auctioned off or reduced to scrap metal. There is no switch to flip that can magically restart the engine of American manufacturing. We have effectively erased 50 years of industrial capability. The economic fallout from this is nothing short of catastrophic, beginning with a staggering trade deficit of $800 billion annually. That is $800 billion in wealth flowing out of this country each year, a hemorrhage of capital that will never return. The consequence is the eradication of middle-class jobs. Where manufacturing once provided $60,000 to $80,000 salaries with benefits, the new service economy offers $30,000 to $40,000 wages with no security. The American middle class has been systematically dismantled, replaced by economic subjugation to China. At any moment, China can sever our supply of pharmaceuticals, electronics, and essential manufactured goods. They hold a strategic stranglehold over our economy. We possess no equivalent leverage in return. This translates directly into a critical national security vulnerability. In the event of a conflict with China, we would lack the ability to produce the armaments necessary for our own defense. Our industrial capacity is gone. Theirs is formidable. Stage 5 represents the point of no return, complete deindustrialization, and we are perilously close. Another 5 years on this trajectory, and what remains of American manufacturing will be functionally extinct. We will be reduced to a service economy, a nation of finance, tech, and entertainment, but we will produce nothing tangible. History teaches a brutal lesson. Service economies do not sustain superpowers. Industrial might does. The British Empire learned this painful truth. Declining from a global superpower to a secondary power the moment its manufacturing base crumbled. America is now learning that very same lesson, the hard way. Consider the three fallen titans: Britain, Detroit, the Rust Belt. Each followed the exact 5-stage pattern of industrial death. Each was blinded by the belief that they were too dominant to fail. Each arrogantly dismissed the rising competition. And each one sacrificed long-term industrial capability for the siren song of short-term profits. In the end, they lost everything. The factories went silent, the jobs vanished, the communities withered and died. None of them ever recovered. America now stands in stage 4, a single, terrifying step away from complete and irreversible deindustrialization. One step from total economic dependency on our chief rival, China. One step from forfeiting the very industrial base that forged our status as a superpower. And this leads to the cruelest truth of all. Once a nation's manufacturing core is lost, it is lost forever. Britain has failed to rebuild its industrial base in 75 years. Detroit remains a shadow of its former self after 50 years. The Rust Belt continues its slow decay 40 years on. The historical pattern is unambiguous. Once stage 5 is reached, the condition is permanent. We have been given 3 distinct warnings, 3 identical case studies of collapse, 3 grim examples of the fate that befalls nations that cease to build. America is now walking that exact same path. The only remaining question is not if, but when. What is the timeline for the completion of Stage 5? Perhaps 5 years? Or perhaps the threshold has already been crossed, and we are merely refusing to acknowledge it. But the cold calculus is clear. We are one stage away from a permanent state of decline. If this stark analysis has revealed what has been lost and the precipice on which we now stand, subscribe. Because when Stage 5 is complete, when America's ability to produce has been extinguished, you will need to understand the precise mechanics of our downfall and why the warnings went unheeded. The answers are not speculative predictions of what's to come. They are etched into the rust and ruins of Britain, Detroit, and the Rust Belt. A historical autopsy I am prepared to conduct for you.